Get off that boat, Owen. Grant's voice carried across the dry riverbed. You're embarrassing yourself. Owen didn't answer. He was staring at Ranger, who sat frozen before the pilot house door, ears sharp, eyes fixed as if someone inside had whispered his name. There's nothing in there, Grant said. Samuel Whitaker locked that room 28 years ago. Owen turned slowly. Then why does my dog know where to wait? The crowd went quiet. The old brass lock trembled under Owen's hand. And before sunset, Red Willow Crossing would learn the dead boat had been keeping one last promise. Owen Mercer had $900 left to his name, a duffel bag in the bed of his old pickup, and a German shepherd who kept looking at him as if the road still owed them one more answer. By 4 o'clock that September afternoon, the sun had turned the Arizona dirt the color of old pennies, and the town of Red Willow Crossing sat under it without much movement, as if even the wind had grown tired of passing through. The hardware store had 2 customers. The diner sign buzzed like a trapped insect. Across from the county annex, 3 men in ball caps leaned against a faded rail and watched Owen step out of his truck with Ranger at his side. Nobody said anything at first. They only looked at the dog, then at the man, then at the long dead shape rising beyond the edge of town. The Marigold Belle, a riverboat without a river, a stranded steam vessel propped on sunken timbers, half silvered by weather, half eaten by dust, sitting 40 miles from the nearest water deep enough to carry anything larger than a canoe. Once people said she had been beautiful, wide decks, brass rails, a paddle wheel painted red as a Sunday apple. Tourists had come from Phoenix and Tucson to ride her down the Canyon Verde River, when the water still ran high and green beneath the cottonwoods. But rivers, like people, could be redirected. Years of drought, bad planning, and a concrete diversion project upstream had left the old channel dry, and the town that had lived by the river learned the hard arithmetic of abandonment. First the visitors stopped coming. Then the boarding house closed. Then the mechanic left. Then the church sold its bell to fix the roof. And the Marigold Belle stayed where she was, too costly to move, too sentimental to burn, too useless to love. Owen stood at the foot of the county steps with one hand resting on Ranger's head. He was 41, though the stillness around his eyes made him seem older when he was tired. He had the compact strength of a man built by work rather than vanity, broad through the shoulders, narrow at the waist, with sun-browned skin and dark hair cut short out of habit. There was a faint crease between his brows that never quite went away. Not anger, not bitterness, just the mark left by years of listening for things other people missed. In the Army, Owen had been a combat engineer, though he rarely used the word combat anymore. What he remembered most was not the noise or the fear, but the bridges, the generators, the water pumps, the stubborn machines that had to work because people were counting on them. He had spent half his life fixing what kept others moving. Then one day the uniform came off, the phone stopped ringing, and the world seemed to decide he was a tool that no longer fit the job. Ranger pressed his shoulder against Owen's leg. The dog was 7, black and tan, with a graying muzzle just beginning to show and one ear marked by an old scar from a collapsed search site in New Mexico. He had the patient, watchful eyes of a creature who did not confuse silence with emptiness. When Owen's cousin Grant handed him a final envelope that morning and said the repair shop was going in a new direction, Owen had not argued. He had taken the money, nodded once, and walked out with Ranger beside him. $900. That was the price Grant had put on years of steady hands. Early mornings, late nights, and every broken thing Owen had ever coaxed back to life. Now 800 of those dollars sat in a plain white envelope on the desk of Martha Bellamy, the county clerk, whose glasses hung from a chain, and whose expression had gone from polite to worried to openly bewildered. "Mr. Mercer," she said, tapping the bill of sale with one careful finger, "I need to make sure you understand what this is. That boat has back taxes, structural issues, no utility hookup, and no practical purpose anyone around here has been able to name in nearly 3 decades." Owen looked through the dusty window toward the Marigold Belle. The late sun caught the pilot house glass, and for one brief second the dead boat flashed gold. Ranger lifted his head. His ears came forward. "I understand," Owen said. Martha studied him the way people study men they think are about to make a mistake too private to interrupt. "Most folks would use this money to leave." Owen's mouth moved almost into a smile, but not quite. Most folks already did. Behind him, One of the men outside gave a low laugh, not cruel exactly, but careless in the way people can be when they are standing safely on the shore of someone else's decision. Owen heard it. Ranger heard it too. The shepherd turned, not growling, not threatening, only looking at the men with such calm seriousness that the laughter thinned and died. Martha sighed, stamped the paper, and slid it toward him. "Then she's yours." Those 3 words should have sounded foolish. Instead, they landed somewhere deep in Owen's chest, in a room he had kept locked without knowing it. He folded the deed once, then again, and put it in his shirt pocket. Outside, the heat rose from the pavement in soft waves. The town watched him cross the road toward the boat. Ranger, padding beside him, paused silent in the dust. Up close, the Marigold Belle seemed less like a wreck and more like an old animal asleep under the sun. Her paint had peeled in long curls, her windows were clouded, her paddle wheel leaned at an angle, ribs exposed. But the bones were still there. Owen could see them, good joinery beneath the rot, brass beneath the tarnish, a frame that had bent but not surrendered. Ranger climbed the gangplank first. Halfway up he stopped and looked back, waiting. Owen followed. On the top deck the air smelled of dry wood, river mud long gone to memory, and the faint ghost of machine oil. At the far end stood the pilot house, its oak doors sealed with a blackened brass lock. Ranger walked straight to it, sat down and stared. Not at Owen. At the door, Owen came up slowly, his boots creaking on boards that had not carried a careful step in years. He touched the lock, warm from the sun, old but not broken. "What do you hear, boy?" he whispered. Ranger did not bark. He only leaned forward and placed one paw against the threshold, gentle as a hand laid on a grave. Owen looked back over the town, at the men by the rail, at Martha in the county window, at the empty storefronts and the dry riverbed beyond them. Everyone in Red Willow Crossing thought he had bought a dead boat. Owen was not yet sure they were wrong. But as the sun lowered and Ranger refused to leave that locked door, one thing became clear. The Marigold Belle had kept something hidden, and somehow the dog knew it before any human did. Before Owen Mercer learned how to live with silence, he learned the sound of machines. His earliest memories did not come in pictures so much as noises. A wrench clicking against a stubborn bolt, river water slapping the belly of a docked ferry, his father humming low through his teeth while leaning over an engine that smelled of oil, heat, and old metal. Owen had grown up outside Natchez, Mississippi, in a narrow house where the porch sagged at one corner and every drawer held some useful thing. Washers and coffee cans, screws wrapped in paper, copper wire coiled like sleeping snakes. His father, Raymond Mercer, repaired ferry engines and small riverboats for men who usually paid late but always came back. "Anything can be understood," Raymond used to say, pressing a tool into Owen's palm. "And most things can be saved if you don't insult them by rushing." Owen carried that sentence into adulthood the way some men carried prayers. He became the kind of man who noticed loose hinges in restaurants, uneven tires in parking lots, the faint wrongness in a generator's rhythm before anyone else heard it. When he joined the army, it was not because he wanted glory. Glory had always seemed too loud. He wanted structure, purpose, a place where knowing how to make broken systems work still mattered. In uniform, Owen became a combat engineer, then a facilities specialist, then the man others called when the power failed, when water lines cracked, when equipment coughed itself into uselessness under impossible heat. He was not famous. Men like Owen rarely were. He kept lights burning in places that would have gone dark. He kept pumps running. He kept doors from falling off their frames. He kept other people moving. But the trouble with being useful for so long was that when the work stopped, Owen did not know where to put his hands. After 20 years of service, he came home with 2 canvas bags, a box of commendations he never opened, and a strange, hollow politeness that made conversations feel like rooms with all the furniture removed. People thanked him for his service in grocery store lines, and he nodded because they meant well. But the words landed awkwardly. They were too clean. They did not touch the part of him that woke before sunrise, expecting orders that never came, or the part that stood in his kitchen listening to the refrigerator hum, because silence, real silence, felt too large. He found work in Arizona through his cousin Grant Halloway, who owned a repair shop outside Red Willow Crossing. At first, the arrangement seemed merciful. Owen rebuilt carburetors, tuned old tractors, fixed air conditioners that should have died 10 summers earlier. Customers liked him, though they often said he was hard to know. Grant liked what Owen could do, which was not the same as liking Owen. Over time, the shop changed. New signs, new software, new investors with pressed shirts and bright phrases like efficiency model and customer turnover. Grant began pushing replacements instead of repairs. "Nobody wants a lecture on old parts," he told Owen one afternoon, watching him clean a fuel pump that another mechanic had already thrown in the scrap bin. "They want new, fast, easy." Owen had looked down at the pump, its small valves lined neatly on a rag. "It still has life in it." Grant laughed softly. "You always say that." The words followed Owen longer than they should have. "You always say that." As if mercy toward broken things were a weakness, as if patience were an old habit the modern world had outgrown. The day Grant let him go, Owen did not raise his voice. He stood by the office door while Ranger waited beside the workbench, the shepherd's eyes tracking every shift in the room. Grant spoke carefully, using the soft language people use when they have already made the hard decision. Restructuring, new direction, nothing personal. Then he slid the envelope across the desk. $900, final pay, rounded up. Owen picked it up and felt, absurdly, the same cool heaviness he used to feel holding a damaged part in his hand, turning it over, searching for the fault line. Only this time the thing on the table was his own life, and he could not see where to begin. Ranger rose before Owen moved. The dog crossed the room and pressed his body against Owen's knee, not dramatic, not needy, just present. Owen rested 2 fingers between Ranger's ears. For a moment that was enough to keep his breath steady. Outside, the Arizona sun hammered the gravel lot white. Grant said something about being sorry. Owen nodded once because anger required more strength than he had. He walked out with his tools, his dog, and the envelope. By noon he had no job, by 2 he had no plan. By 4 he was standing in front of a dead riverboat, recognizing in its warped rails and dust-blind windows something he had been afraid to name in himself. Not ruin exactly, but disuse. And perhaps that was why he bought it. Not because it made sense, not because anyone would understand, but because all his life Owen Mercer had believed that what others dismissed too quickly deserved at least one careful hand, one patient eye, one last honest chance. Ranger had never needed many words from Owen Mercer. A lifted hand, a shift in breath, the faint pause before a man stood up too quickly from a chair, those were enough. The German shepherd had been trained to read the world beneath the world, to notice what people tried to hide from one another, and sometimes from themselves. He was 7 years old now, with a black saddle across his back, tan legs dusted pale from the Arizona dirt, and a muzzle that had begun to silver around the whiskers. One ear stood sharp and clean. The other carried a small notch near the tip, a souvenir from a collapsed storage facility outside Las Cruces, where Ranger had once worked search and recovery after a monsoon flood. Nobody talked about that day much. Owen did not like turning pain into conversation, and Ranger, being wiser than most people gave dogs credit for, never asked him to. Before Ranger came into Owen's life, he had belonged to a regional emergency response team. He knew the scent of rain under concrete, hot wires behind walls, old fabric in tight spaces, human fear settling into wood and dust. He had walked through ruined motels after storms, across empty fairgrounds after evacuations, through warehouses where the lights had gone out, and men in helmets moved softly, because softness mattered. Ranger had not been a loud dog. Even then, he rarely barked unless barking would change something. His gift was steadiness. He could enter a broken place and make the air feel less broken, simply by standing there, ears forward, waiting for the living to be found. When age slowed his hips and a long day began to make him favor his right side, the team retired him with kind hands and a certificate Owen kept folded in a metal box. The program called him a companion dog for veterans, but Owen had always disliked that phrase. Companion sounded too small. Ranger was not decoration for loneliness. He was not a cure wrapped in fur. He was a witness. He had seen Owen on mornings when getting out of bed felt like lifting a garage door with bare hands. He had seen him sit at the kitchen table, with coffee gone cold, staring at nothing while sunlight moved across the floorboards inch by inch. He had seen Owen smile at customers, nod at neighbors, hold the door for strangers, then return home emptied by the effort of appearing fine. Ranger never tried to fix him. That was what made the dog different from people. People offered advice as if pain were a loose screw. Ranger offered weight, warmth, presence. He would place his chin on Owen's knee and stay there until Owen remembered he had a body, a room, a reason to move. On the first evening aboard the Marigold Belle, while Owen carried his duffel into the lower cabin and tested each floorboard before trusting it, Ranger began his own inspection. He moved slowly through the boat, nose low, paws careful, as if reading a long letter written in sense no human language could hold. Near the galley, he paused at mouse trails and old coffee grounds. In the passenger lounge, he sniffed a torn velvet bench and sneezed twice, offended by 30 years of dust. At the engine room hatch, he stood for a long while, breathing in the mineral ghost of coal smoke, dry grease, and river silt baked hard by years of heat. Owen watched him from the corridor, one hand on the strap of his bag. "You approving the purchase?" he asked. Ranger glanced back at him, then continued up the narrow stairs to the top deck. The light was thinning. Red Willow Crossing lay quiet below, its buildings caught between sunset and surrender. The dry riverbed beyond town looked like a scar the earth had stopped explaining. Ranger crossed the deck without hesitation and stopped again before the pilot house door. That door was different from the others. Owen had noticed it earlier, but had been too tired to think about why. The oak was darker, less warped, shaded by the overhang. The brass lock was old but not cheap. Someone had cared about keeping that room closed. Ranger sat, not casually, not from fatigue, but with purpose. His ears rose. His nose hovered a few inches from the crack beneath the door. Owen came up beside him and felt a quiet unease move through his chest. Not fear, exactly, but the sense of standing at the edge of something that had waited a long time to be noticed. "Nothing in there but dust," he said. Though even as he said it, he did not believe himself. Ranger did not move. A breeze passed over the deck, carrying the smell of sunburned wood and distant mesquite. Somewhere in town, a screen door slapped shut. Owen crouched, resting one hand between Ranger's shoulders, and felt the dog's body still as stone beneath his palm. The shepherd was listening with more than his ears. He was listening the way he had listened in ruins, in empty buildings, in places people had given up on too soon. Owen looked at the locked door, then at the dog who refused to leave it. For the first time since Grant's office, something inside him shifted. Not hope, not yet, but curiosity. And curiosity was often the first small mercy before hope dared show its face. Red Willow Crossing had not died all at once. It had thinned. That was how Owen thought of it on his second morning aboard the Marigold Belle, standing on the upper deck with a tin cup of coffee warming his hands while the sun climbed pale and hard over the eastern ridge. A town could thin the way cloth thinned at the elbows, slowly, honestly, from use and neglect, until one day light came through where strength used to be. Below him, Main Street stretched in a tired line between the county annex and the old feed store, its storefront windows catching the dawn in dull rectangles. A barber pole stood still in front of a shop that opened only 3 days a week. The movie theater had been turned into storage for a roofing company that had since moved to Flagstaff. The bank clock was permanently 14 minutes slow, and no one bothered to correct it because, as Martha Bellamy had said once to a customer, time around here has earned the right to be inaccurate. In late September, Arizona carried a different kind of mercy than winter ever could. The mornings were cool enough to breathe. By noon, heat pressed its palm against every wall, every windshield, every human thought. Dust rose from the roads in red-brown veils and settled on porches, mailboxes, boots, dog fur. The mesquite trees scratched at the sky. The cottonwoods along the old channel still stood, but they had grown narrow and guarded. Their leaves turning silver in the wind, as if whispering about water they remembered better than anyone living did. The Canyon Verde River had once curved along the western edge of town, deep enough for excursion boats, barges, and the kind of tourists who bought postcards and tipped waitresses in folded bills. Old photographs in the diner showed women in summer hats standing beneath the Marigold Belle's striped awning, men in white shirts holding paper tickets, brass rails shining like something promised. But promises made to rivers were dangerous things. A diversion project 28 years ago had sent the water elsewhere in the name of progress, and progress, as it often did, kept moving after the speeches ended. The river shrank first, then the dock sat too high above the mud. Then the boat made fewer trips, then none. Owen had seen places like this before, not in shape but in spirit. Facilities closed after funding disappeared. roads bypassed by newer highways. Men and women spoken of in the past tense while still standing in the room. Red Willow Crossing wore that same expression. Not hopeless, not exactly, but careful not to expect too much. Ranger seemed to understand the town without needing its history. He trotted beside Owen that morning as they walked down the gangplank and across the packed dirt toward the dry channel. His paws left clean marks where old wagon ruts had hardened like scars. At the riverbed, Owen stopped. The channel was wide, pale and empty except for stones, weeds, and a few stubborn pools where last month's rain had gathered beneath shaded banks. He tried to imagine the Marigold Belle floating there, her paddle wheel turning, her whistle rolling across the cottonwoods, the town lifting its face because something beautiful was arriving. The image hurt a little, not sharply, more like pressing on an old bruise to see if it still knew your name. A pickup slowed on the road behind him. Owen did not turn, but he felt the glance from the driver, the quick measuring of the veteran, the dog, the impossible boat. People in Red Willow Crossing had already made a story out of him. That was what small towns did when facts felt insufficient. Some said he was chasing a tax write-off he did not understand. Some said the army had left him strange. Some said he must know something about the land nobody else did. The truth was simpler and harder to explain. Owen had bought the Marigold Belle because she looked abandoned in a way he recognized. Ranger stepped into the riverbed and sniffed at a flat stone half buried in silt. Then he looked back toward the boat. From that angle, the Marigold Belle rose above the town like a stranded memory, awkward and grand, ridiculous and dignified. Her shadow fell long across the dry earth, touching the edge of Main Street as if she still belonged to it. Owen stood there until his coffee cooled. He thought of Grant's office, of the envelope, of all the polite sentences people used when they were finished with you. Then he looked at Red Willow Crossing. The peeling paint, the quiet windows, the benches no one sat on before sunset, and understood something he had missed the day before. He had not bought one forgotten thing. He had bought a forgotten thing in the middle of a forgotten place. And if either one of them was ever going to breathe again, he would have to learn both their stories. The bill of sale looked too clean for something as weathered as the Marigold Belle. One sheet of county paper, 2 signatures, 1 stamp, and a vessel that had outlived a river changed hands as easily as a used lawnmower. Owen sat across from Martha Bellamy in the county annex while Ranger lay beneath the chair, his head resting on Owen's boot. The office smelled of copier ink, lemon cleaner, and old files that had spent too many summers absorbing heat. A box fan turned slowly in the corner, pushing warm air from one side of the room to the other, as if fulfilling a duty no one expected it to enjoy. Martha had pulled every document she could find. The original tourism charter, the tax forfeiture notice, the failed demolition bids, the faded survey map showing where the Canyon Verde River used to run. She's been county property since 1998, Martha said, adjusting her glasses. Before that, Verde River Excursion Line owned her. Before that, a man named Samuel Whitaker had her under private lease for special tours. After the diversion project, nobody knew what to do with her. Owen studied the map. The old river was drawn in blue, graceful and confident, curving beside Red Willow Crossing like an arm around a tired shoulder. On the current survey, that same curve was gray and marked seasonal drainage. It was strange how paper could erase water so neatly. "Why 800?" he asked. Martha gave a dry little smile. "Because 700 sounded like we were giving up and 900 sounded like fraud." Owen almost laughed, and the surprise of it loosened something in his chest. Martha softened when she saw it. "Truth is, Mr. Mercer, the county wanted the liability gone. Folks complained when we talked about scrapping her, then disappeared when we asked for donations. Sentiment is cheap until it comes with an invoice." Outside the window, the boat sat under the hard afternoon light, her top deck casting a crooked shadow across the dirt. Owen could feel the envelope in his jacket pocket before he touched it. $900. Grant's final calculation, the last neat number someone had assigned to him. He took it out, counted 8 bills, and laid them on Martha's desk. She did not reach for them right away. "You'll have 100 left, I know. Utilities aren't connected, I noticed. Roof leaks in the lounge. West stair rail is loose. Engine room hasn't been inspected in years." Owen looked at the boat again, and for a moment he was not in Arizona. He was 12 years old in Mississippi, standing beside his father at a dock, while Raymond Mercer ran his hand over a cracked engine housing and said, "People call things dead when they don't want the trouble of listening." Owen swallowed. "I've worked with worse." Martha looked at him for a long time, not pitying him, which he appreciated, and not quite believing him, which he understood. Then she took the money, stamped the form, and turned the page around. "Sign here." Owen signed his name slowly. The pen scratched like a match being struck. Ranger lifted his head, ears pricked, as if the sound meant something. Maybe it did. Maybe every new life began with a small noise no one else noticed. When the paperwork was finished, Martha handed him a brass key on a plain ring. "This opens the lower access gate and the side service hatch. Nothing else, far as I know." Owen held the key in his palm. It was warm from her hand and heavier than it looked. "What about the pilot house?" Martha's expression changed. Just a flicker, but Owen caught it. "No key in the county records. Who locked it?" "Samuel Whitaker, people say, last captain. After his wife passed, he spent more time aboard than at home. Then one day he left town, or maybe he didn't. Stories get lazy after 28 years. Ranger stood. Not suddenly, not anxiously, but with calm certainty, as if a name had been called in another room. Martha glanced down at him. "That dog of yours seems to have opinions." Owen slipped the key into his pocket. "He usually has better ones than I do." Outside, the men by the rail watched him cross the road again. No one laughed this time. Owen did not feel triumphant. Triumph belonged to people who knew what came next. What he felt was smaller, stranger, and more fragile: responsibility. He had not bought escape. He had bought a question made of wood, brass, dust, and silence. And as Ranger walked ahead toward the gangplank, Owen understood that the first thing the Marigold Belle required was not money, or tools, or even courage. It required respect. The first night Owen slept aboard the Marigold Belle, the boat spoke in small complaints. Wood ticked as the desert air cooled. A loose pane trembled whenever the wind moved through the dry riverbed. Somewhere below, a length of chain shifted with a tired metallic sigh, though there was no water left to rock it. Owen lay on an old bench in the passenger lounge with his jacket rolled beneath his head, and Ranger stretched along the floor beside him, one ear turned toward every unfamiliar sound. Sleep did not come easily. It rarely did. But the boat's noises were different from the silence of rented rooms and empty kitchens. They had texture. They had age. They reminded him of his father's workshop after dark, when every machine seemed to settle its bones and wait for morning. Before sunrise, Owen was up. He made coffee on a camp stove near the galley door, using bottled water he had bought with part of the $100 he had left. Ranger ate from a dented metal bowl, then followed him through the lower deck, as if the day had been assigned to both of them. Owen began with the floors. Not because they were the most visible, but because a man who trusted bad footing was asking to be humbled. He tested each board with his weight, marked the soft ones with chalk, pulled loose nails, and stacked usable planks by size. Dust rose around him in patient clouds. By 8 o'clock, sweat had darkened the back of his shirt. By 10, his hands were black with old grime and red at the knuckles. He worked without hurry, and that surprised him. For months, maybe years, he had moved through tasks as if trying to outrun a thought. Here, the work would not allow that. The boat demanded attention. Every hinge, every railing, every warped stair seemed to say the same thing his father used to say: "Slow down, listen first." Around noon, Martha Bellamy arrived with a cardboard box of records and 2 jars of iced tea wrapped in a dish towel. She stood at the foot of the gangplank, looking up at him with the squint of a woman who had watched many men begin projects loudly and abandon them quietly. "You still here?" she called. Owen wiped his hands on a rag. "Boat hasn't asked me to leave yet." Her mouth tipped into a smile. Ranger came down to greet her, polite but reserved, accepting a brief touch on the head before returning to Owen's side. Martha left the box on the deck. Old brochures, inspection notes, some photographs. "Figured if you bought her, you ought to know who she used to be." After she left, Owen opened the box in the shade. The photographs were faded, edges curled from heat, but the Marigold Belle inside them was almost unrecognizable. Bright awnings, polished brass, a painted sign on the side, passengers waving from the rail, the paddle wheel clean and proud. Owen studied the faces longest. People had stood here in good clothes, carrying luggage, laughing into sunlight. Someone had swept these floors every morning. Someone had polished the windows. Someone had believed this boat was worth the effort. That thought stayed with him through the afternoon. He patched the lounge roof with roofing tar and salvaged metal. He cleared the galley of mouse nests and broken glass. He set buckets beneath the worst leaks, although the sky held no promise of rain. Ranger inspected each improvement with solemn authority, occasionally nudging Owen's glove or sitting in a doorway as if guarding a decision. When the heat grew sharp, Owen rested under the upper deck and shared half a can of tuna with the dog, pretending not to notice when Ranger left the larger portion for him. Near sunset, Owen carried a broom up to the top deck. The pilot house door waited at the far end, darker than the rest of the boat, its brass lock holding the last untouched silence. Ranger went to it immediately and sat. Owen leaned on the broom handle, tired enough for his thoughts to soften. "Not today," he said. "I know," Ranger's eyes seemed to answer, but soon. Owen swept until the deckboards appeared beneath the dust, long golden lines emerging from gray. The work was small, almost laughably small. One cleared room, 3 patched leaks, a safer step, a little less dirt. Yet, as the sun lowered behind Red Willow Crossing and the town's windows caught the light, Owen felt something he had not felt in Grant's shop, or in any place since leaving the service. He felt useful without being used. There was a difference, a quiet, holy difference. He sat on the top step with Ranger beside him and watched evening gather along the dry riverbed. The marigold bell was still broken. So was Owen, in ways he had not learned to name. But neither of them had been handled with contempt that day, and sometimes respect was not a speech or a grand gesture. Sometimes it was a man replacing one rotten board because he believed something old deserved to hold weight again. On the 7th evening, after the heat had loosened its grip and the town had gone soft around the edges, Owen finally carried his tool roll to the pilot house door. He had spent the day replacing 2 steps, cleaning the galley sink, and coaxing one old ceiling fan into a slow, uneven spin that felt, somehow, like applause. By then his shoulders ached in a way he understood, the honest ache of work completed, rather than the dull heaviness of being dismissed. Ranger followed him up the stairs without being called. For nearly a week, the German shepherd had kept returning to that door at sunset, sitting before it with the patience of a church bell waiting for Sunday. Owen had tried to ignore the feeling it gave him, that low pull beneath the ribs, but certain mysteries have a way of making silence louder. The pilot house stood at the forward end of the upper deck, its windows filmed with dust, its oak door darker than the walls around it. The brass lock had gone almost black, but when Owen touched it, he felt quality beneath the tarnish. Not cheap, not careless. Someone had closed this room with intention. He unrolled his tools on a folded towel, small screwdrivers, a brass brush, penetrating oil, a pick set, a flashlight, a pair of needle-nose pliers. He did not bring a hammer. That mattered to him. A locked door was not an enemy. It was a question. "We do this right," he told Ranger. The dog lowered himself beside the threshold, chin resting on his paws, eyes fixed on Owen's hands. The work was slow. Owen brushed grit from the keyway, oiled the old mechanism, removed the decorative plate screw by screw. Twice he stopped to let the metal rest because old brass could snap if hurried. The sun slid down behind the empty storefronts of Red Willow Crossing, turning the windows amber one by one. From below came the faint clatter of dishes at Nora's diner, the creak of a porch swing. A pickup passing too slowly as someone tried to see what the veteran was doing now. Owen kept his eyes on the lock. In the army, he had learned that fragile systems failed when men brought pride into delicate work. In his father's shop, he had learned the same lesson with kinder words. Listen first. The final pin shifted just after dusk. It made no dramatic sound, only a small inward click, modest as a held breath finally released. Ranger lifted his head. Owen stayed still for a moment, one hand on the knob. The feeling that moved through him was not triumph. It was caution, almost reverence. Some rooms did not open only into space. Some opened into another person's unfinished goodbye. The door resisted at first, sealed by heat-swollen wood and years of dust. Owen eased it forward inch by inch until it gave with a sigh, and the air that came out was dry, close, and faintly sweet with old paper, machine oil, and cedar. His flashlight beam crossed the room. Dust hung in the air like gold filings. There was a captain's chair bolted to the floor, cracked but upright. A brass speaking tube curved beside the wheel. Charts lay pinned beneath curled weights. A coffee mug sat on a narrow shelf. its handle turned toward the chair, as if the man who used it had simply stepped away to check the weather and never returned. Owen did not enter right away. Ranger did, carefully. The dog took 3 steps inside, sniffed the floorboards, then stopped beneath a built-in desk under the front windows. His tail lowered, not in fear but concentration. Owen crossed the threshold after him, and the floor gave a soft groan beneath his boots. He felt suddenly aware of his own breathing. On the desk lay a logbook, its leather cover dry but intact. The name stamped inside had faded, yet Owen could still read it. Samuel Whitaker. Ranger nudged the lower panel of the desk with his nose, then looked back. Owen knelt, ran his fingers along the grain, and found what the dog had found first, a seam too fine to be accidental. Beneath the dust, beneath the silence, the Marigold Belle had kept one more compartment closed. Owen sat back on his heels, the flashlight steady in his hand. For a long moment he did nothing. He only looked at Ranger, at the old desk, at the darkening town beyond the glass. Whatever waited inside had survived 28 years of heat, neglect, jokes, and forgetfulness. It deserved one more act of patience. "All right," Owen whispered, his voice rougher than he expected. "Let's hear what she's been holding." Owen did not open the hidden panel right away. He sat in the old pilot house with Ranger beside him and let the room settle around them, as if barging into the past too quickly would be a kind of trespass. Outside the dusty glass, Red Willow Crossing faded into evening, the town's few lights blinking on one by one across the dry riverbed. Inside, the flashlight beam rested on the seam beneath Samuel Whitaker's desk. It was almost invisible unless a person knew how to look for patient craftsmanship. A hairline break in the wood grain, a shallow curve where a thumb might press, 2 brass pins darkened by years of heat. Ranger touched the panel once with his nose, then stepped back. Owen smiled faintly. "You found it," he whispered. "I'm just catching up." He worked the mechanism with a pocket knife, not forcing it, only coaxing. The first latch gave with a soft click. The second resisted until he rubbed away the old grit with his sleeve. Then the panel loosened and opened toward him, breathing out the scent of cedar, paper, and money that had slept too long. Inside was a canvas pouch tied with faded blue cord, a sealed envelope, a carved wooden heron no longer than Owen's hand, and a photograph wrapped in wax paper. He touched none of it for a moment. The stillness in his chest had changed. It was no longer the heavy stillness of a man bracing for loss. It was the careful stillness of someone being trusted by a stranger. Owen opened the pouch first. The bills were old but usable, stacked in neat bundles, $3,500. Not a fortune, not in the modern world, but to a man with $100 left and a boat full of leaks, it might as well have been a bridge appearing over a canyon. His throat tightened, and he looked down at Ranger, who had settled beside the desk with his eyes half closed, as if the discovery had confirmed something he had known all week. Owen unfolded the letter. The handwriting was narrow, slanted, and steady. "To the one who still sees worth here," it began. "My name is Samuel Whitaker, last captain of the Marigold Belle, though captain is a grand word for a man who spent his final years guarding a boat no river could carry. If you are reading this, then you did not break the door, and you did not tear this desk apart. That tells me something about you." Owen stopped there, struck by the intimacy of being understood by someone 28 years gone. He read on. Samuel wrote of the Canyon Verde when it still ran green, of passengers laughing under striped awnings, of his wife Eleanor, standing at the rail with one hand on her hat, and the other resting over her heart whenever the whistle blew. Eleanor had loved the boat not because it was profitable, but because it gathered people who otherwise would never have shared the same view. Ranchers, teachers, travelers, mechanics, widows, drifters, veterans passing through with nowhere to hurry back to. A good place, Samuel wrote, does not ask first what a person can pay. It asks whether they need a chair, a cup of coffee, and a little dignity before the road takes them again. Owen's vision blurred before he could stop it. He wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand, irritated by the tenderness of it, grateful for it too. The letter ended simply. I saved this money for repairs I never got to make. Maybe I was saving it for you. Never measure a person, a place, or a life by the season when it looks empty. The photograph showed Samuel and Eleanor on the top deck, older than Owen expected, both smiling into bright river light. The wooden heron had been carved by hand, its wings folded, its beak pointed forward as if still searching for water. Owen placed it on the desk beside the money and the letter. Ranger rose, rested his chin briefly on Owen's shoulder, then looked out toward the town. Owen understood. The secret had never been the money alone. The money was only a match. The letter was the flame. By morning, the money was still on the pilot house desk, exactly where Owen had left it, stacked beside Samuel Whitaker's letter and the little wooden heron. He had slept badly, not from worry this time, but from the strange pressure of being given a choice. $3,500 could put distance between him and Red Willow Crossing. It could buy gas, a motel room for a few weeks, maybe a used trailer somewhere. No one knew Grant Holloway's name or watched him from across the street as if his life were a public repair job. Owen stood in the pilot house before sunrise, coffee untouched in his hand, while Ranger lay beneath the wheel with one paw resting over the threshold. The dog had not slept far from that room since it opened. Owen read the last line of Samuel's letter again. Never measure a person, a place, or a life by the season when it looks empty. Outside, the dry riverbed waited in the early blue light. Empty, yes, but not erased. That distinction began to matter. Around 8, Owen walked to the county annex with Ranger beside him and asked Martha Bellamy whether the town had any rules against opening a small boarding house inside a boat that no longer floated. Martha removed her glasses slowly. That may be the most Red Willow question anyone has ever asked me. He told her the idea in pieces because saying it all at once made it sound too fragile. 2 cleaned rooms for travelers. A small repair bench in the former ticket office. Coffee in the passenger lounge, fair prices, honest work, no questions designed to embarrass anyone. Martha listened without interrupting. When he finished, she leaned back, looking past him through the window toward the Marigold Bell. People will talk. They already do. Permits will be a headache. I've had worse headaches. Her face softened at that, not with pity, but with recognition. Then start with the fire inspection and the business license. And Owen, he paused at the door. Don't let them make you feel foolish for building slowly. Slowly became the rhythm of the next months. Owen spent Samuel's money like a man pouring water over seeds in a drought. Lumber first, wiring after that, plumbing patched, not replaced where patching was enough. New mattresses from a church surplus sale in Mesa. Second-hand lamps from an estate auction. A coffee urn Nora Whitcomb donated from the diner after declaring it too stubborn to die and therefore your kind of appliance. Luis Ortega, the town carpenter, came by one afternoon to point out everything Owen was doing wrong with the stair rail, then stayed 3 hours fixing it with him. He returned the next day with cedar planks in the back of his truck and said, without looking directly at Owen, "Don't make a speech. Just help me unload." The boat changed by inches. Dust gave way to wood grain. Windows cleared. Brass began to catch light again. The old passenger lounge became a room with mismatched chairs, a long table, coffee, and a hand-painted sign, the Bell House and Repair Dock. Under it, in smaller letters, Owen added, "Sit first, settle up later." Some people laughed when they saw it. Some looked away too quickly, as if kindness written plainly made them uncomfortable. But the first man who came in was a retired lineman whose truck alternator failed outside town. Owen fixed it for half what a shop in Flagstaff quoted, and Nora brought them both pie. The second was a woman driving to care for her older sister in Yuma, too tired to keep going, too proud to admit it until Ranger placed his head gently on her knee. After that, word traveled in the unorganized way good things do. A ranch hand brought a generator. A traveling nurse rented the small rear room for 2 nights. A widower came every Tuesday for coffee and said almost nothing, which Owen understood perfectly. Not everyone paid in cash. Some sanded rails, patched screens, swept the deck, delivered spare parts, or simply returned when they could. Owen kept a ledger, but he learned not to let the ledger keep him. Ranger became the first face people trusted. He greeted each visitor with quiet judgment and quiet mercy, lying near the door like a living promise that no one would be rushed out before they were ready. One evening, as the sun turned the dry channel copper, Owen saw Grant Holloway standing at the foot of the gangplank, staring up at the boat with his hands in his pockets. For a moment, old shame moved through Owen, quick and familiar. Then Ranger rose and stood beside him, steady as a shadow with a heartbeat. Grant cleared his throat. "You really made something out of it." Owen looked at the lit windows, the open door, the coffee steam drifting into warm evening air. "No," he said quietly. "It was something. I just stopped treating it like nothing. 18 months after Owen Mercer signed his name on the county paper, the Marigold Bell glowed at dusk like something remembered correctly at last. Not new. Owen never wanted her to look new. New would have been an insult, a cheap costume over an honest face. She still carried the grain of weather in her rails, the faint lean of age in her decks, the small scars left by years of sun and dust and neglect. But now the windows shone. The brass caught the evening light. The paddle wheel, repainted a deep red by Luis Ortega and 3 volunteers who argued kindly over every brushstroke, stood proud against the dry riverbed as if it had finally forgiven the absence of water. A wooden sign hung beside the gangplank, the Bell House and Repair Dock. Beneath it, in Owen's careful block letters, were the words people had come to know by heart. Sit first. Settle up later. That evening, the whole town seemed to have found a reason to wander over. Nora brought coffee in steel urns and biscuits wrapped in clean towels. Martha Bellamy arrived, with a folder under one arm and tears she pretended were caused by dust. The retired lineman who had been Owen's first customer sat near the lounge window, telling anyone who would listen that the alternator still ran better than it had any right to. A traveling nurse left a note on the community board thanking the man with the quiet dog and the clean room. Someone had placed flowers in an old oil can on the front table. Someone else had polished Samuel Whitaker's wooden heron and set it beneath a small framed copy of his letter. People read it slowly. Some nodded, some looked down. A few stood there longer than they meant to, caught by the line Owen had underlined in pencil: never measure a person, a place, or a life by the season when it looks empty. Ranger lay at the top of the gangplank, his muzzle wider now, his movements slower, but his eyes as steady as the day he first sat before the locked pilot house door. Visitors stepped around him with respect, though most stopped to touch his head. He accepted each hand with grave patience, like a captain receiving passengers. Owen watched from the open doorway of the repair room, where tools hung in careful rows and the smell of coffee mixed with cedar, machine oil, and desert evening. He had expected satisfaction to feel larger, louder. Instead, it felt like breath returning after a long climb, quiet, real. Enough. Grant Holloway came just before sunset, carrying a cardboard box of old tools from the shop. He stood awkwardly near the rail until Owen walked over. Found these in storage, Grant said. Figured they belonged where people still fix things. Owen opened the box and saw his father's old socket set, the one Grant had once borrowed and never returned. For a moment, many possible answers rose in him. Some sharp, some tired, some carrying the old need to make another man understand the weight of what he had done. But Ranger rose then, slow and deliberate, and came to stand between them not as a warning but as a reminder. Owen placed a hand on the dog's back. "Thank you," he said. Grant looked at the boat, at the people inside, at the lights glowing where dust had once slept. "I was wrong about you," he said. Owen shook his head gently. "You were wrong about what makes a thing worth keeping, that was all." It was enough. Later, after the last cup was washed and the town drifted home under a sky crowded with stars, Owen climbed to the pilot house with Ranger beside him. The room was no longer a sealed memory. It had become his office, though he kept Samuel's chair by the window and never sat in it without thinking first. On the desk were 3 objects: Raymond Mercer's steel watch, Samuel Whitaker's carved heron, and Ranger's old leather training collar, retired now but not put away. Owen looked out over Red Willow Crossing. The dry riverbed still held no water. The old channel remained pale beneath the moon. But below, lights burned in the lounge. A repaired generator waited for pickup. 2 travelers slept safely in clean rooms. A widower had left a $5 bill under his coffee cup, though Owen had told him not to worry about it. The town had not become rich. The river had not returned. No miracle had undone the years, and yet something had shifted, as surely as a current finding a hidden channel underground. People came here now, when they were tired, when their car failed, when they needed work, coffee, quiet, or simply a place where no one asked them to prove they deserved kindness. Ranger lowered himself at Owen's feet with a soft sigh. Owen reached down and rested his hand on the dog's head. "You found it first," he whispered. The shepherd's tail moved once against the floor. Outside, the desert wind passed over the Marigold Bell, not cold, not cruel, only moving on. The river never came back to Red Willow Crossing. But somehow, under the patient hands of a veteran and the watchful heart of a German shepherd, the town learned to flow again. If this story moved you, take a second to like and subscribe, so more stories like this can find the people who need them. And tell us in the comments, which moments stayed with you most, and where are you watching from tonight?